cuties and the 40% of you who have still not subscribed to the Ethicsverse. What the heck's wrong with you? Welcome to the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. If you think fixing your workplace can fix your world, like we say every single week here, your network is your net worth. So please drop your LinkedIn URL in the chat and try to connect with at least one person today. You know, I say this every week, and I'm going to say it as long as you know me. We have to take advantage of this asset we have in our industry. We have the most collegial industry there is, and you get no bonus points in life for reinventing the wheel. So reach out to someone because everyone is willing to share, everybody is willing to listen, and everyone is willing to help because, man, we are wired to leave it better, aren't we? All right, so books, podcasts, thought leadership. There's so much great stuff coming out. If you're not listening to at least one thing a week besides the Ethicsverse, of course, you should. So Lisa Beth Lentini Walker, who's on today. How's it going, Lisa Beth? She was just on the Great Women in Compliance podcast. Every time she's on there, it's phenomenal. So check that episode out. Hit this QR code, and you can see all the stuff that's out there. The fastest growing ethics podcast in the world is the Ethics Experts. We just had Tyson Avery on. You got to check this episode out. He is phenomenal, super smart, and he was a JAG officer in Afghanistan or Iraq, I think. For the whole Abu Ghraib thing. And he has some really great compliance lessons from that, how those controls failed and how the culture within that prison or that internment camp resulted in that. So I would highly encourage you to check that out. He is super smart, really cool to listen to. Also, if your homepage is not the Radical Compliance blog, then click in the upper right corner of your browser and add that immediately. The Radical Compliance blog by the one and only Matt Kelly, coolest guy in compliance, who is here today. Round of applause for Matt Kelly. Has great articles every single day, every single week. There's great insights coming out of that. So if you're not checking that out, you absolutely should. And if you're not checking out the Ethico ecosystem, you absolutely should as well. So so many people are so upset with the major providers in our space, Navex and Conversant / OneTrust / EQS or wherever they're at now. If you are sick of getting tossed around, if you're sick of a dev roadmap that never seems to come to fruition, or you're just kind of sick of the status quo, you should definitely check us out. We really help with a lot of efficiency, a next-gen tool that helps you sort your cases and put your eyes on the risk intelligence that matters most. Twice the case closure, or half the case closure time, twice the speak up, twice the manager participation, and twice the identified rate. All of that really helps you to show your value a lot more. And again, focus your scarce resources on the things that matter most. We are going to be giving away Navigating the Politics of Healthcare. Jay is going to be on our healthcare Ethicsverse next week, so you should absolutely join us next Tuesday at noon Eastern. But we're going to be giving away, of course, 5 of those because we love ya. So drop your comments in the chat. We're going to be talking a lot about 2025 and the new administration. So drop your comments and your questions in the chat, and we, of course, will work those in. And then again, I just wanted to remind everybody about the Promised Land promotion. Ethico is your promised land. If you're sick of wandering through the desert, come and check us out. If you're coming from Navex, or you're coming from OneTrust, or you're coming from Conversant, we have up to a year free. We have a 15%, you want to know what the price is? It's 15% than what you're paying. Okay. So check that out. And another great announcement, you guys are going to love this. We're coming live. We're taking the show on the road this year. So Ethicsverse Live, we're going to be coming to a city near you every single month this year. We're coming to Chicago. We're coming to Boston, New York. Name a city, we're coming. So check that out. Our first 2 events, our first event is in Charlotte next month. So if you are a compliance person or an ethics person in Charlotte and you'd like to come, check out the website. All right. With all those announcements done, I am passing over to the coolest guy in compliance, coolest glasses in compliance, the one and only Matt Kelly. How's it going, Matt?
It's going very well, Nick. Thank you very much. I do like the pink shades in the AI image. It's always interesting to see what the AI is going to do to me next.
Exactly.
So everybody who is joining us, thank you very much. As Nick said, we are here today to talk about what is coming in the next administration and overall in the next year. There's more than just the administration that you will have to think about in 2025. And we do have Lisa Beth with us as well, Lisa Beth Lentini Walker. Where is Lisa Beth? There you are. Lisa Beth, hello.
Looking
welcome.
Good, Lisa Beth. Look at you.
I like the new outfit you put me in for this one. Mm-hmm. Amazing.
So for everybody listening, here are the 3 big things I had thought we could try to talk about today. We are trying to look forward to what is coming in 2025. What's on your mind? How should you prepare for those? So number 1, clearly, what is going to happen with the new administration coming in? The president-elect has said very much he wants deregulation to be a big part of his plan. I have no doubt some parts of that will probably come to bear, but what else would you need to think about if you're a compliance officer? How do you respond to deregulation? How do you respond to anything that isn't being deregulated or other jurisdictions that might still regulate you? How are you trying to get your bearings? How can compliance teams continue to demonstrate that they are a valuable asset for the organization? I do suspect there are some cynics out there who might think they could backpedal a bit on ethics and compliance, which strikes me as a foolish idea, but there's probably some voices out there that think that, and how would we counter-argue that point of view? And then lastly, just some discussion about what else do you think you will need to be able to succeed in the coming year? Is it more about needing new tools and technologies? Is it about applying old skills to new challenges? Is it something else? And certainly for everybody who is listening, if you have other ideas of what you think is going to be big, pop that into the attendee chat. If you have questions or comments, comment in there as well. We will set aside some dedicated time at the end of the hour to do Q&A formally, but really, if you ask a good question or raise a good point, we'll weave that into the conversation right away. So with that
and
preamble,
if you see good questions, put an emoji reaction on them so our eyes can find those find those faster, please. Thanks.
Yes, by all means. With that preamble out of the way, I am going to kick off with a lead question. I guess first, Lisa Beth, to you, and then to you, Nick. Like, what do you see as the biggest compliance challenge compliance officers are likely to encounter in 2025? I mean, we have a laundry list of challenges we could pick. Lisa Beth, what's on your top of your hit list? And then Nick, what do you think?
Well, so I love that we titled this A Year of Change, because changes are a-coming. You highlighted that there is a push towards deregulation in some spaces, but that doesn't mean that there's going to be no rules. It's just that the rules are shifting. And with any significant change, the onus is on us to be able to communicate that change, adapt. So I see 2025 as a year of extreme agility. There are going to be focuses that are going to be moved. We do see antitrust as being an area of a lot of work, but also sanctions and tariffs are taking on whole new levels. I mean, you hear every single day that there are these pushes for global shifts, whether it's, is the US buying Greenland, or, what's going on with the Panama Canal? It's going to be a constant, I think, for the next year at least, if not more, series of shifts. So I'm putting on my racing shoes, because honestly, I think we're going to have a lot of changing to do in the next few years.
Nick, what do you say?
Yeah, I think Lisa Beth is right as usual. I think there's going to be a lot of change, and I think you were right to say that we need to stay agile, and we need to, I think, find the opportunities in the change. I think whenever there's change, there's tremendous opportunity to shift faster, to be more flexible, and find new kind of openings in the line for you as the running back to kind of run through there. I think the agility is a big issue. Many times it's hard for us to be really agile because we put things in place, and there's a certain sort of permanence or something, or there's a certain lack of flexibility to putting something out, releasing a policy, and so forth. So I think we need to be mindful of whatever is in place and be ready to make changes in real time as the environment changes. Again, our job is to be that circulatory system of the organization, which we can only do best if we can adapt to the changing circumstances, the changing regulatory landscape. I think there's probably also going to be more scrutiny around ESG claims. And I would also probably say a continued emphasis on, cybersecurity, data privacy, a la the TikTok thing.
So first, I want to also ask everybody listening, if you just want to pop an answer to this question in the chat. I'd love to know what everybody else thinks might be the big issue that you are going to try and worry about, or you expect that you'll worry about in the coming 12 months. The other observation that I would make, and it's funny because I was talking with some European compliance officers earlier today, And they wanted to know, well, what's going on in the United States? What should we expect after January 20th? And I said, at the same time, you will have to expect a lot of uncertainty. I do think that this administration is going to, I don't want to say fly by the seat of its pants, but will fly by the seat of the president-elect's tweets more often. But at the same time, the uncertainty, a lot of things will not change. And even the deregulatory bent, I think people might forget, deregulation is not an easy thing to pull off. Some things are clearly not going to be deregulated. Lisa Beth is absolutely right to say there's going to be more sanctions enforcement. Well, you can't deregulate sanctions and have more of it at the same time. And there are various other state regulators you're going to have to worry about. Cybersecurity is a regulation that is not going to go away. I see a bunch of people talking about AI. AI, like, we're still struggling to regulate it in the first place, and the AI doesn't care right now if it's regulated or not, but it's clearly a big deal. So there's like this dichotomy that's happening. There's going to be a lot of uncertainty and a lot of things that don't change at the same time, I think. But I don't know, Lisa Beth or Nick, if you have any response to that. I'm not quite sure what to expect in the coming year.
Well, I would say don't expect the worst. I think like high conscientious people that seem to self-select into this space, there's a lot of perfectionists in this space. I think what comes along with that perfectionism or that high conscientiousness is like an ongoing algorithm to like test and think about what could go wrong, right? That's kind of what a lot of our job is from a risk mitigation perspective. But I just want to remind you that like the worst case scenario that has ever popped in your mind, and any time you're doing this sort of forward projection, it never happens. And so I think the worst thing we can do is go into this with wringing of the hands, gnashing of the teeth, the sky is falling type of a mentality. And I think it's probably not going to be as much sort of negative change as we think. It's probably going to have a much lower impact than we think. And I think if we're coming into it with that kind of high anxiety posture, it's going to reduce the likelihood that we're able to see the opportunity in the change.
I totally agree about the high anxiety. Look, our brains are not wired to actually like change.
Right.
Change is more challenging. Like, it takes more of our mental resources to adjust to anything that is outside of our standard rhythm. We like predictability. We like to have patterns that are recognizable. So I think the thing to prepare yourself for is change isn't a bad thing. There's a change curve for everyone and for every organization. Part of the big job here is to say, how do we embrace that discomfort that comes from any form of shift? It's, I bring it back to other life events, right? This last year, one of my children went to college. That's exciting, but it's also a lot of change, and it takes a lot to adjust to. It doesn't mean it's, good, bad, or otherwise. It's just different. So if we can get to the point where we understand that the different is where we play, and the different is where we can add value by making it easier for people to predict outcomes by having clarity and being that translator of change, then we provide real value. It means that, when you come into work, it may not be the same as yesterday, but that doesn't mean it's better, worse, or otherwise. It just means that it's something to adjust to and something where your skills can really shine and you can show value.
Yeah, but I think to your point, I think you're exactly right. But I think to your point, it's all about the frame we come to the change with. If your frame around your child going to college is totally negative, well, then you're not going to see all the magic in this new chapter that they're starting. I was lamenting to a friend of mine. My wife had bought new throw pillows, and I was lamenting to a friend of mine, and I said, when is this done? When is this house project ever done? like we already have throw pillows that nobody uses, you know what I mean? And he said, you know what? It's never done. It's always going to keep going. And when I kind of I sat back after that and I was like, okay, well, that's a different frame. If I'm running toward kind of a completion or a terminus where like we're not changing freaking throw pillows anymore, and I never achieve it, well then, or I never arrive there, then that's very frustrating. But if in my frame it's like, okay, well, we're always going to have new throw pillows. We're always going to have new decorations from freaking Home Goods popping up around our house. Well, then that's not going to kind of irk me as much. And so again, to Lisa Beth's point, like the change is constant. That is the nature of, it's kind of a platitude at some level, but like the only The only constant is change. And so when we know that it's never going to be complete, we know that we're going to continue to work on this ongoing sort of quote unquote living document that is our program, instead of thinking like, okay, it's done, it's never going to be done, then I think we can be a little bit more nimble and a little bit more agile as that change comes down the pike. And again, we can find the opportunity in it a little bit easier.
So first, Nick, your home improvement is done, somebody once told me, when your children inherit your house. That's when it
That's
ends.
probably right.
However, I want to pick up on the thread that we're talking about here about being responsive to change. And I think that is an excellent point, but I'm trying to then kind of reverse engineer. So what are the compliance program capabilities you're going to need to have to be able to be responsive? So I'm guessing it's going to be better ability at risk assessment or better ability at regulatory change monitoring. But what else should compliance officers be thinking? This is the sort of capability I need to have personally, and my whole program and team will need to be better at this, this, and this to be more agile in this uncertain environment where we're adapting and nudging people. What kind of skills should they have or capabilities should they have? Lisa Beth, I'll ask you first and then Nick.
So I think a compliance team requires many different skills, but first and foremost, in times of extreme change, you need to have very, very good assessment skills in terms of regulatory change management. You need to have a plan in place to kind of ingest all of the new rules and regulations or shifting rules and regulations and adjust. And the second thing that I think is really important is communication. Communication skills are so important in times of change. That allows us to make sure that everybody is on the journey with us together. So those outreach, whether it's ambassadors or you've got, a centralized repository of your policies, being able to communicate how things are shifting and how to create predictability for other teams is going to be very important. And your relationship with the board and senior leaders is going to be very critical, because all of these things that are shifting may change your outlook from a financial perspective. It may change the opportunities that exist in the market. And so you need to be very closely connected with those relationships to the board, to senior leaders, and to the organization as a whole, and able to communicate the changes that you're seeing coming in.
Nick, what would you say?
Yeah, I think, agile program management is a key. So again, that going back to that flexibility, that agility, that ability to pivot quickly, that's a big one. And with respect to communication, I agree 100%. What I would add to it is the skill of helping someone frame something. I think we have a high agency opportunity to put the right frame around an issue, a topic, a point of discussion, a new change that's coming. And I think we need to lean into that in times of change, not only to make sure that people aren't, leaving whatever change you're pushing in response to a regulatory change in this example, make sure that they have the right frame around it and they recognize that this is a value add kind of a change. Hey, the environment has changed, the regulation has changed, and this change that I'm pushing forward as a result of it is going to improve your life, vis-a-vis XYZ. Our ability to do that and communicate that with confidence, I think is really critical, because again, I talk about this a lot, but if we are leaving it, if we're leaving it up to our adversary, whoever we're trying to convince, to just do all that arithmetic in their head and make those connections, the odds of them landing on the proper frame for whatever change we're pushing is always lower than if we're giving them that right frame. So again, this is sort of a derivative of communication. How can we be influential in the face of change to make sure that the position that we have in the minds of the people that we're trying to influence is ascending to a position of more power or more credibility or more reliability, whatever those positive characteristics are. But I think we have to really lean into that to again take advantage of this opportunity to show our value to the business in the face of change. We are business enablers. We're not stoppers for growth. We want to help this car run down the road of commerce a lot faster.
So let me ask this, because I floated some of these theories that you both have been discussing the last minute or two to somebody else who had said, well, do you mean that then the chief compliance officer is going to be more like the chief risk officer or the chief risk management person? And at first I said no, and then I said, okay, now I'm not sure. And this person already had a chief risk officer, and they were saying, I'm not necessarily sure that we might butt heads or not, or there might be turf wars. But if you want to be more of a trusted advisor to senior management about here's what's coming and here's how we should avoid pitfalls, that kind of sort of sounds like risk management advice, as opposed to here's a rule, we're going to comply with it, which is the traditional view a lot of people have of ethics and compliance. So I don't know how these two ideas do overlap or don't overlap, but what would you think?
So I'll jump in on that one, because I think that we're always in the business of understanding risk. There's very, very rarely do I see that there is a law and there is one way to interpret it and that's the only way to implement, et cetera. Like, we are always working in the gray. And there are conflicting laws, a whole bunch of stuff. So I think as compliance officers, there are lots of reasons why we're always in the business of risk assessment, risk mitigation, et cetera. That doesn't mean that we're the chief risk officer, because risk, there's more to risk than just what laws apply. There's lots of things to risk, like including, operational risk and production risk and financial risk, et cetera. But where we excel and where we can be BFFs with the risk officer or whoever is tasked with that responsibility for the organization is we can help those folks see around corners. We can help be a set of trusted eyes, ears, thought partners in helping them understand the landscape as it applies to our subject matter expertise. And that's a tremendous gift. And when implemented properly, you can create lasting relationships that really are in service of the business and showcase the important things that we bring to the table, other than just being able to say, here's a rule, here's how we're going to deal with it.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, as usual. I would also say that at some level, I kind of don't get the distinction, because even on your own team, you're managing risk, right? People are telling you something, they're making commitments to you, and you're making some bet as to like whether that commitment is going to happen. And so I think we're all kind of risk managers at some level. And at its core, risk is just kind of standard deviation of outcome relative to some expected value. So I expect this stock price, and instead, it's going to kind of bounce around in some range around that expectation. Across a business, like the quote unquote risk of a business is just the accumulation of all those little standard deviations across those, those different normal distributions around all those different, expectations of outcome. And so the extent to which we can help, in the context of our own department or across the business where, again, we should be that circulatory system, the extent to which we're able to like reduce that standard deviation of outcome, that's de-risking the company as well. So I think when we can reframe our job as it's our job to de-risk the organization sort of wherever that lives, then we can help out, the risk department, even though we're not necessarily living in that silo alongside them.
So let me ask a more specific question from one of the listeners here. And I did want to pivot into some of the more specific subjects and regulatory issues that may or may not come up in 2025. So somebody here writing in, will the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act be dead by this administration? There seems to be no appetite to enforce it. I have a spirited answer to that question, but before I get on my soapbox, let me ask both of you what you think of that. And Lisa Beth, I'll put it to you first. What would you say to that view? Because that view is not uncommon, but what would you say?
So personally, I don't think that FCPA is going to be dead. Whether it's going to have as much attention as it has in the past is up for debate. What I'm seeing, though, throughout every aspect of compliance is that there are more and more old rules that are being used to tackle new problems. So I would not be surprised if we see FCPA deployed differently, perhaps more towards areas where there are sanctions or where sanctions aren't as clear and the government wants to make a point. So I think that that particular rule, I don't think that's set on arrival. We know that FCPA is very, very important for integrity of markets and a whole host of other things. And so I think it'll just be deployed differently. Still there, still something to watch, but it may not take up as much airspace as it has in the past.
Yeah, and that's not necessarily uncommon if you look back at our industry for the last 20 years. There always seems to be some topic that everybody's focused on. A few years ago, everyone was focused on ESG, and that was every single webinar was all about ESG. And then everyone's focused on privacy. And so there's a natural focus change that I think has happened and that will likely happen again. But to Lisa Beth's point, I absolutely agree. I don't think it's going to go away. They're not going to delete the FCPA or anything like that. But the areas of focus may change a little bit.
I do think that, yes, the areas of focus may change. But okay, now I'm up on my soapbox for 60
Get
seconds.
on there, Matt. We love you on a soapbox.
Do it.
This is exactly what we said 8 years ago, that there'd be no FCPA enforcement in the first Trump term. And I can think of multiple FCPA enforcement actions in his term and compliance officers who went through it, and they would beg to differ with the premise because it wasn't dead for them. Number two, we should remember the statute of limitations for FCPA violations does extend beyond the 4 years that President Trump served. And there may be a different administration with a different attitude in 2029. And if you didn't have a compliance program now, that will be a painful conversation at some possible future where they are enforcing it. And then the other thing that strikes me is a lot of what you have to do for good FCPA enforcement is so valuable for corruption risks generally. And so here in Boston, we had a case in the courts. Takeda Pharmaceuticals found that one of its employees was running an embezzlement scheme where she set up a fake vendor with her then boyfriend, and they built the company for about $2.5 million over the course of several years. Really, the only difference between what she did and an FCPA scheme was that the boyfriend lived in Boston. And if he had been a foreign government official, that would have been an FCPA violation. Everything about that case, all of the materials, controls, policies you would need to catch it, the muscle memory for it, it's the same, whether it's FCPA or internal fraud. So in many ways, I would argue that a good anti-corruption program is going to help the company across a range of issues. FCPA is a big one, but even if that is on the back burner, there's going to be a whole lot of other problems that slide onto the front burner. You have to put them out the same way. And I don't know if either of you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Like the FCPA came out in response to a problem. And like to your point, whether the FCPA existed or didn't exist, we would probably, as operators of businesses, want to have controls in place to avoid fraud and corruption, right? I mean, that's normal. So I think to your exact point, the existence of the regulation at some level is like irrelevant relative to the application of the controls in order to prevent this, this thing that the regulation is meant to prevent. So again, we were talking on a recent episode about like, we shouldn't be trying, just like we don't want our people to just follow the letter of a policy. We want them to be, apply ethical, independent thinking, around the spirit of the law. We need to have that same view with these regulations. We shouldn't just be trying to like appease a regulator. We should be trying to solve this for ourselves. We should try to solve the corruption problem or the fraud problem within our organization for ourselves. And I think 9 times out of 10, probably 99 out of 100, we will end up complying with that regulation, assuming that is, this might be a leap, but assuming that that's logically written.
Well, and I will just add 2 cents in here because I can't help myself. Number one, the FCPA is based on foreign corrupt practices. So there's more than one country involved in here. So whether it's the United States or, some other country, there are anti-corruption laws in most jurisdictions in the world. So even if the FCPA just suddenly evaporated, like there are all these other anti-corruption rules. And frankly, there are even interstate commerce rules that make sure that if there is some type of fraud or corruption, there is a responsive regulation that's not FCPA because it's within the United States. So I think there's a lot of other things at play, and whether one particular rule is used more than another, That can shift, but the ultimate outcome, everyone wants business that works and that's on fair grounds, because that's good business.
I would just add that the FCPA is really just the legal manifestation of corruption risk. And it kind of gets back to what we discussed. Are you a compliance officer? Are you a risk advisor? Are you both? The corruption risk is there. And, you know, if you said, well, we have no FCPA worries anymore, but we have no idea if employees are embezzling us blind, I don't think your situation would improve with senior management if you actually just said that out loud. A lot of it is about what's the fundamental risk, how do we guard against it, and oh, by the way, a lot of that actually looks a lot like an ethics and compliance program for the FCPA or the Bribery Act or anything else. Let me shift gears to another more specific issue, artificial intelligence, because that is one that people had mentioned a lot, where the Biden administration had an AI executive order, kind of sort of putting some rules around AI adoption so far, not very many, in my humble opinion. Trump administration says it will rescind that and adopt something else. What does that look like? We don't know. We also have the EU AI Act. We now have state AI laws. There's going to be more. So I am wondering how compliance officers should think about artificial intelligence as a risk and artificial intelligence rules and trying to get a compliance program around that. Lisa Beth, I don't know what you're hearing or how often this comes up in conversation, but what would you advise to get people to start thinking in the right ways about that?
So I will say AI is today's shiny penny. Everybody's talking about it. Not everybody actually understands it and understands the difference between machine learning and agentic AI and things like that. So there are lots of people who are willing to talk about it. Not as many people who understand it, even fewer who understand like how the ethics and compliance elements play into it. It is an area of extreme growth, so we should all be learning about it. Now, exactly how this is going to manifest with the new administration, you're right, we don't know exactly. What we do know is they don't like what's come before, so we can expect that that AI guidance will be rescinded and that it will be replaced with something that I think is going to be a little bit more permissive than the Biden administration would have liked. I think that we are in what is now a race, and whether it's a race to the bottom or the race to the top, I'm not sure. We are going to have to watch as this unfolds. The concern that I have right now is that the dialogue has mainly been around efficiencies and how great AI is, and less around the governance and ethics around some of this AI. So we have some catching up to do in terms of being able to be at a seat at the table or in the room where some of these decisions are happening. I don't think that as a profession, we have the option of ignoring this. I don't think we have the option of like just throwing up our hands. I think we need to roll up our sleeves and start getting in the middle of artificial intelligence and working really closely with some of the people who are being appointed as the new heads of AI in different organizations. Just like 2-3 years ago, there were all of these folks who were being named as the heads of DEI initiatives within companies. Now we have a bunch of people being named as the heads of AI. And so that's an area that I see that's going to have tremendous growth over the next 4 years.
But I would also maybe think about if you're like head of AI, I just don't know how permanent that position would be. You know what I'm saying? Like 10 years from now, are we going to have head of AI? Like, I don't know, was there a head of spreadsheets when spreadsheets first came out that introduced all these new risks to us? You know, I'm being a little stupid, but I think this administration is going to be totally pro AI. I mean, Elon Musk, I think, is like sleeping at the foot of Donald Trump's bed in Mar-a-Lago right now. So there's a lot of AI energy coming from Elon Musk. And I think you're exactly right. I think we have to get smart about it, and I think we have to be common sense about it. I don't think that this is a wave we're going to be able to dam. Like this AI tsunami is going to wash over all of our businesses. In 5 years from now, the way that we do work, I think, is going to be significantly different than the way we do it now, where orgs, people, frontline folks are just kind of dipping their toes in the AI pool. So I think to Lisa Beth's point, we have to be agile with this change. We have to be smart about this change, and I think we have to be common sense. We've had Reed on a couple of times. Reed Blackman, he runs a podcast called Ethical Machines. He has a book by the same name. I would really encourage you to check that out. You can 2x his episodes pretty quickly, and he has some really common sense, smart frames around AI. From an ethics perspective, back to Lisa Beth's point, the entire focus has been about efficiency gains. Well, there's this whole sort of orbit of ethical issues around this topic that I think we got to be smart on if we're going to be able to, I don't want to say go toe to toe, but to have an impact within the organization in line with our mandate.
Well, I think it's a good point you bring up, Nick, because I know another compliance officer. I asked this person, what is your big problem or your big issue right now? And they said, I am in a fight with my CTO, head of IT, over AI, because I think that, this CCO, so I think we have compliance issues that need to be addressed with our AI adoption, but my IT manager is saying this is a technology thing. Why are you here? You don't show up in my office when I'm implementing a new software patch. Why are you in my office now when we're talking about AI? And this CCO was like banging their head against the wall, trying to break through to the chief technology officer that AI is going to be an important thing with a lot of compliance implications. And I was struck by, that was their issue. They weren't concerned about Donald Trump taking office or what the deregulation is. It's AI and me being able to barge my way into that technology conversation before it's too late. I don't know if either of you have any thoughts about that. We kind of touched on it before about how to demonstrate relevance, but here it is again, raising its head.
Yeah, I think that this is something that this is part of the life of a compliance officer. Let me just say that. Having to be able to articulate why the compliance person needs to be in the room when people are just doing what they think is incremental add-ons to things that they've already done, whether it's software or a tech solution, et cetera. So our ability to communicate that and make sure that they can see the benefit of having us in the room instead of us barging our way in is going to be one of the key challenges ahead, showing the value before they can truly see it in action.
Spot on.
All right. I did also want to bring up a more difficult issue, I think, but clearly immigration is going to be a big priority for this administration. And I wonder how much tension that's going to introduce to large companies. I was talking with an immigration consultant not long ago who said that, a lot of companies will have to pay much more attention to their I-9 compliance, be ready for audits. At the same time, I could easily see some companies with large workforces being very divided over, some employees might decide to call a enforcement hotline about suspected undocumented workers in their office or in their workplace. Some others might think this undocumented worker is a nice person. I don't want to see them deported. I'll try and help them. This is going to be a very inflammatory and divisive issue, I fear. Lisa Beth, what do you think about it first? And then Nick, what do you think? And how are compliance officers supposed to prepare for all of this?
So I think there's a lot of rhetoric out there. Let me start with that, right? We just went through an election. Election tends to show a lot of extremism. What I have seen over my past decades of life is that typically when an administration gets in, everything ends up being a little more moderated for a whole host of reasons, including that there are checks and balances in our government. There's usually nothing that's so out of whack that and able to survive through our court systems, et cetera, that it's this massive overhaul. And look, the immigration debate is going to be, I think, raging for a while. It's one of the things that is a hot button. And what I see is some divisions in terms of how even immigration is being talked about, whether it's people who are in the tech sector. They seem to be talking about people who have immigrated who are, highly skilled or highly educated differently than others in our economy. And so I think that this is going to be a raging debate. I personally don't see that coming through hotlines as a really likely outcome, just because I don't see that as something that will be taking up a lot of airtime. It takes a lot of effort to decide you're going to report something into a hotline. I could see it coming up more often in an HR context. Not that it's impossible, but I think our hotlines are going to still have activity, but it is, I think, going to be more along the ethical side of the house where there's no other option to report something of concern. But yes, I think immigration will take up a lot of discussion. I just don't know how much action is going to happen from that.
Agree. I mean, there are 11 million undocumented immigrants in the United States each year from like 2016 through 2019. I think somewhere between 300,000 and 400,000 were deported. How many more are they going to do? Are they going to do 10 times more? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just not going to happen. Well, yeah. I mean, that's not going to happen, right? They're not going to deport 4 million people. I mean, that's just logistically, I feel like that's impossible, So I think you're right, Lisa Beth. I think it's probably going to be a top, I think it's going to take up way more, of the conversation than like the negative impact that is going to be debated in that in that conversation. I would imagine that it's probably going to be, I just would bet that the average, over this administration of like deportations is probably going to be pretty much in line with the historical average. That's what I think.
I mean, some of the ways that I have heard this might manifest in the compliance world and, frankly, give compliance officers some headache is, you could have a person call on the hotline and say, well, my coworker is speaking Spanish. Clearly, that means they're illegal and they should be deported. No,
there will be that. I mean, that will happen for sure.
But yeah, I mean, on the other hand, if somebody calls up and says, well, my coworker goes by the name John Smith on the job, but everywhere else his name is Juan Carlos and he speaks Spanish at home, that's more serious. And then suddenly the compliance team can't ignore that. If there's, you'd have to think about what would credible evidence of an undocumented worker on my staff actually look like. And if we get a call on the hotline, how are we supposed to respond to it? Or how are you, in fact, trying to document the legality and the accuracy of the documentation that somebody gives you? And, if you have erroneous documentation, it can be fixed. But if you have late documentation, it can't. And things like that. It was a really eye-opening conversation I had with this immigration consultant that there's going to be some basic compliance practices that you should have in place, but you will definitely need to revisit them to make sure they are up to par for the enforcement increase that is likely to come. But Lisa Beth, and I agree with you entirely that, there's going to be a lot of talk. I don't know what will translate into real action. And Nick, I love the way you described it, is the conversation about it takes up way more space than we'll probably actually see in practice. I just don't know.
John Hughes. Hey, John put a comment in the chat. He said, we are already dealing with these reports of someone speaking Spanish and they must be illegal and stuff like that. So again, a lot of the stuff is probably going to be more of the same. It might come in like a little bit higher frequency or a little bit more often, depending on what the sort of broad conversation is, in the headline, so to speak. But again, just like we were talking about FCPA controls really are just, anti-corruption controls, regardless of jurisdiction. There's going to be a lot of stuff that's in place right now that we'll be able to repurpose and reapply from a procedural standpoint as these changes sort of come down the pike for us.
Here's somebody else who is saying that for every call that you might get, so-and-so is speaking Spanish, you could wind up on the other end with a national discrimination complaint or a nation of origin discrimination complaint if you mishandle calls like that. So there is a certain damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of precarious situation that could arise there. The one last big sort of regulatory specific issue I wanted to talk about was the proliferation of state level enforcements that we might see. And I have seen some examples of it lately. I think about this a lot too, that if the federal regulation or enforcement goes away, you could still wind up with 50 different state regulators coming after you for the same issue. And there was in the news earlier this week, a big mortgage banker that they had an enforcement action from a coalition of 53 different state banking regulators. I don't know how you get to 53 when you have only 50 states, but whatever. But that's the sort of thing I wonder about. Are you going to see coalitions of state attorneys general, or are you going to see a flash mob of state AGs coming after your company? Instead of one federal regulator punching you on the nose, if you have 50 different ones pointing at you or poking at you, I'm not sure your situation has improved any. Right. But you still need the compliance capabilities there. What do you think about that point, and how compliance officers will need to redevelop some of their regulatory change management or their enforcement investigation capabilities? Lisa Beth, what would you say?
That is one of the areas that I really wanted to talk about, which is as the federal government decides, hey, we're going to do less on the enforcement side, or we really think this is a states' rights issue, because that is one of the things that the administration has been very clear about. The incoming administration is that they think a lot of stuff should be a state level issue, whether it's, reproductive rights or a whole host of things. So what I think you may end up seeing more of is additional complexity where our skills are needed more, right? With additional complexity of 50 states in the United States, all taking a little bit different approach, like, whether it's, looking differently at biometric data from state to state or privacy concerns. I think that's where a lot of the work is going to come up in the next 4 years. Is states, I think, are going to start flexing their muscles more and more, and you're going to see some pretty broad discrepancies between the way that the states are choosing to look at the same issue, right? We're seeing that all over the map when it comes to reproductive rights. We're seeing it, I think, initially in some of the privacy differentials. And now we're starting to see more and more of these attorney generals banding together, a lot on the banking side of the house, the state banking side of the house. You're seeing more and more of that. So I think they're just starting to flex these muscles. And that's where we're going to have a lot of change and a lot of work. So I think there's the potential that over the next 4 years, compliance is going to become much more complex. And as states continue to ramp up, we're going to be even more needed than ever before. So keep that in mind. Yeah, ask me 4 years from now how it went, but I think that's my prediction for the new administration.
And there's opportunity in complexity, right? More complexity. If we can bring a good solution there's a lot of opportunity for us, not only for job security, but also for adding more value to the business. And again, thank God we already are doing this to some degree, right? Like, this is not on compliance officers' radar around privacy, for example, right? Where you have different rules in California and other states and stuff like that. So we might need to apply that same, we might need to apply the same types of frameworks that we use to manage privacy, which has different rules for different jurisdictions, to new areas of focus. But again, this is more of an application of a muscle, or it's more of a flexing of a muscle that we've already built than us having to build a new muscle that we've never used before.
I have noticed already we are seeing more states adopting AI rules or laws. California just published something about state level views on AI. It was not a law, but their state attorney general it was yesterday, so I don't remember it off the top of my head, but I think New Jersey is also adopting a new AI law. Colorado has one. And one thing I had also seen floating around in Washington, D.C. was the idea of devolving cybersecurity standards from the federal government. And they just said, well, we'll let the states handle it. So I think of the lack of a federal privacy law and the 50 state privacy laws we now have. And again, like, you do that for cybersecurity, that sounds like a excruciating pain for IT risks that companies will face. Somebody else here pointing out that in various industries, the compounding pharmaceutical industry is regulated by states, not the FDA, and that has been a disaster. We had a disaster like that in Massachusetts. I can vouch for it. But I'm thinking like, okay, so you'll need better policy management capability. You'll need better training capability. You'll need better regulatory change management capability to monitor what states are doing. So do we have the right tools and technology so far? Will they be able to be extended out that way in the 50 states that might be taking more shots at you? I would love to know what the listeners think of that. Do you already have the sort of tools and technologies that could be used if more states are engaging in more regulation? But Lisa Beth and Nick, I mean, what do you think of those kind of fundamental capabilities and how in shape we are or aren't to be able to handle what's to come?
So I think that personally, I think as a profession, the tools and skills exist. Whether they exist within your organization is another question, and whether you're prepared personally for it. You know, for organizations that were largely domestic and were largely focused on complying with federal laws, this may be very challenging. But let's be realistic here. For any organization that has multi-jurisdictional impacts already, you're already managing lots of laws.
Exactly.
And so, you know, I don't want to overstate like what I think is going to happen here. Yes, it gets more complex. Yes, there is challenge in the nuance and in making sure that you're staying abreast of what's the most stringent standard and where are you aiming at. It's not completely out of the realm of possibility to be able to do this with the tools that you have. It's just a question of how do you implement what you have as there are shifting sands. And there are more shifting sands perhaps than you had before, or than you realized that you had before. But much like data privacy, you're going to go to the standard that you're held to, the highest standard you're held to, and you create a program that's going to meet the standards of where you're operating. And
Exactly.
That doesn't change.
Yeah, and if you're a multinational company that's listed on the American Stock Exchange, there are rules that are required to be on that stock exchange that you must apply to your plant in India and your business in China and all these other jurisdictions. So I'm saying that, that muscle memory, to use Matt's term, that already exists. And the thing I would say is like, this can very, very quickly blow up into a massive mountain that's like so overwhelming. I just want to remind us all that the Pareto principle exists everywhere. That's a universal principle that exists everywhere. So you probably can't do everything that you want to do. So you need to just focus on the 20%, the smaller, the 80-20 rule is the Pareto principle. Focus on those 20% that encapsulate 80% of the risk and just iterate through that process. That's the most effective way to start managing risk and build an effective program because, effectiveness like perfection is an ideal that, while noble to pursue, will never be achieved, right? Like true, can you say with certainty, can you falsify effectiveness? Probably not, because something could always be more effective. So we always just want to have it or be pushing toward that next summit on that effectiveness mountain that we're climbing. And I think the way to do it is with that 80-20 rule or that Pareto principle.
Here's a question from another listener who is asking about the size of ethics and compliance teams. How would you tackle potential reductions in the E&C team? It'll be a tough year, and the expectation from the boards is for companies to be more profitable. I don't know what the answer to that is, but I'll pose the question to, I guess, Lisa and then Nick. Do you think that we will maybe see more pressure to cut teams? And if that pressure is there, how do you argue politely but firmly that it shouldn't happen? What would you say, Lisa?
When has that pressure not been there? I think that the pressure is always there to be profitable, to do more with less. And let's be clear, there are some things on the horizon that I think are very exciting as possibilities. There are ways that we will be able to ingest more information through the use of things like AI to be more effective with the resources that we have. So there's always going to be a push to utilize technology and tools more effectively. That said, one good enforcement action goes a long way in helping people see the light of why you need resources when the going gets tough. And I think that there's, the possibility that there will be some tough going and some rockiness as we look towards the future, particularly if you have businesses that are continuing to grow and change. With any organization, if you are you're either continuing to grow or you're decaying and dying off, right? So organizations that want to grow and be profitable are going to have to adjust to new realities. And that's where you identify how you provide value in light of the growth, right? You don't get, zero growth and compliance if you're growing wildly as an organization. Those two things are not, conducive to long-term viability, because you'll miss something along the way. So that balanced discussion and making sure that the organization understands that if you want to be on this growth trajectory, here's what it's going to take to continue to make sure that you're protecting what you're growing.
Which comes back to mindset, because it's so easy in this game to fall into that, cost center mentality where you really just kind of say, well, nothing's going to change. This is what it is. My policy program is what it is. My speak up program kind of is what it is. This is just kind of what it does. I think to your point, you're either building or destroying. You're either growing or you're decaying. If you find yourself in that status quo kind of mentality where, you're not trying to change anything and you're not trying to eke out more efficiency, for example, or more effectiveness or doing more with less, then I think the odds of you experiencing that pressure are probably a lot higher, because the entailment of this mentality and this posture is one that you're not adding continual value to the business, at least in the minds of the people that are, in the audience, so to speak. So I think I've talked about this and I'm going to keep talking about it until I see this graph change. But I saw a presentation by Pat Harned from ECI where she was showing some information, some responses over the last 10 years, going back to 2013, responses from people for their, global business survey that said, do I, strongly agree, Likert scale for, do I work in a high integrity organization? And the numbers for the last 10 years, she gave us four data points: 2013, 17, 20, and 23. And the numbers were 61%, 60%, 61%, 60%. So that's a flat line over 10 years. So I'm just saying what got us here isn't going to get us there. And so we have to open our minds to doing new things. We have to open our minds to changing a tool, changing a vendor, changing an approach, changing our interaction with the business if we are ever going to move that line, change the sort of slope of that line. So again, I see a lot of opportunity, in the room when she showed this on the screen, the room kind of deflated and I could feel everyone feeling like, gosh, all this stuff we're doing, we're not even moving the needle. And I think it's really a big opportunity for us because we can get those noob gains, those newbie gains. If you don't go to the gym for a long time and you start to see your body change really quickly. Just doing something a little bit different can really unlock a ton of value. And again, reframe in the minds of the people in our organization, our other stakeholders, what the true value of our department is.
I would just give one bit of practical advice, since Nick, you said, do more with less. And I'm sure everybody hates that cliche phrase, but I would frame it a bit as do more with other people, because there's a lot of other people in your enterprise who are also trying to do more with less. But a lot of the problems spill across a couple of different organizations, and you could ally forces. Strong due diligence is something procurement would also like to know about. Strong policy management, say for immigration compliance, would be something that HR is very interested in. You could defray or spread out the costs of certain investments across multiple functions that could all reap a benefit from the right sort of project. But Lisa Beth, I didn't want to cut you off. If you want to have a quick word, and then Nick, I'll let you take it home for everybody.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say, as you think about the future and as you think about this new administration, do really be mindful of the ways that you can find efficiencies. And efficiencies sometimes look like using AI to streamline your responses to the business. We implemented an AI solution when it came to doing something very simple for pre-clearing insider trading. It made the process much easier, both for the user and for our team, saving about 8 hours every month. So it's those simple little gains that we can use technology and what we're seeing as available options in the market to help make us more efficient and make our lives a lot easier.
Yeah.
Find the opportunity, open your eyes to the opportunity, change your mindset. Don't get stuck in this status quo thinking. We are at a tipping point in this industry, but it's going to take us doing things a little bit different and applying that forward pressure to conquer more land within our organizations, to gain more power by showing our impact across the board. Next week, so I just want to remind everybody, next Tuesday, see you next Tuesday, we're going to have a healthcare Ethicsverse focused just on healthcare. There's a lot of great changes coming there. We got Jay coming on, and we're going to be talking about how to navigate the politics in healthcare. And then next Thursday, on our Thursday Ethicsverse, we are going to be going through the FTI Ethico report. It's a survey that was constructed about compliance. Okay. So for Ethicsverse members, that is coming out. You're going to get an early release copy of that, but you are not going to want to miss it. This report is highly insightful, a ton of great nuggets in there, and a ton of great data points that can drive our programs this year. So you're not going to want to miss that. Check out that FTI report. You're going to love it. One more round of applause. Let's see a massive explosion of emojis for the one and only Lisa Beth Lantini Walker and my man, Matt Kelly. And we will see you all next week. We broke 3,000. Okay. 3,700 emojis. That's phenomenal. So love you all. See you on the next episode. Take care.